Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a highly alarming, but honestly deeply fascinating geopolitical scenario laid out in a recent source document. We're going to neutrally unpack the administration's options, looking specifically at why the author argues Trump faces a series of inescapable checkmate scenarios. Think of this analysis like watching a high-stakes chess match, where the clock is practically screaming at you. We're going to examine the board exactly how the author set it up.
To really wrap our heads around the central claim here, we've got to start with this chess concept, zugzwang. Basically, it's a brutal situation where you're put at a massive disadvantage because, well, you have to make a move. But literally any legal move you make just weakens your position. The document forcefully argues that the U.S. is trapped in exactly this kind of multi-front bind right now.
And the source analysis kicks right off with this stark assessment. It lays out a rigid decision tree for the administration, setting up a board where every available branch, every possible policy choice, seemingly leads straight into a brick wall of disaster.
Option 1, retreat.
Okay, so if Trump actually orders a retreat, the author maps out this crazy, catastrophic domino effect. Step 1, leaving just hands Iran the keys to the strait. Then, Step 2, Iran uses that massive geopolitical leverage to force the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, to flip their loyalty. That leads us right into Step 3, which is a forced shift in global payments away from the US dollar. And the finale, Step 4. The ultimate consequence here, according to the text, is the complete collapse of the U.S. empire, all triggered by that loss of dollar hegemony.
Option 2, the status quo.
So if a retreat leads to imperial collapse, what if they just freeze the board? Well, the source paints a remarkably grim picture of inaction too, describing the status quo as this slow bleed for the U.S. The text explicitly points out that staying put offers pretty much zero chance of victory. In fact, the author argues that because it slowly drains your resources and your resolve without actually changing anything fundamental on the board, the status quo might actually be the absolute worst choice available.
It's a textbook geopolitical trap. Keep the status quo, and it's an agonizing, slow decline. But what if you attempt a direct, forceful escalation? The text asserts that Iranian retaliation at that point would just cripple the entire world economy. So we're looking at a complete lose-lose scenario according to this source material.
Option 3, escalation.
Let's assume Trump tries to forcefully break out of the zugzwang with a conventional military escalation. The analysis points out a fatal constraint right off the bat. The U.S. military-industrial complex is already fundamentally crippled, citing critical shortages of rare earth materials, which, are absolutely vital for advanced weaponry, and severe supply chain disruptions. The argument here is that the U.S. simply lacks the logistical health to sustain a major conflict.
The nuclear threshold risk.
Because conventional escalation is deemed logistically impossible, the document then examines the absolute worst-case choice. What if the U.S. reaches for the nuclear option? The text highlights a terrifying reality. Iran is a nuclear threshold country. The core argument is that any supreme escalation by the U.S. to try and bypass Iran's conventional abilities, well, it simply invites a devastating asymmetric countermove that the U.S. just couldn't ignore.
To really put a number on this countermove, the author provides a highly specific metric. The claim is that the United States could be completely destroyed by the detonation of just one single nuclear weapon, provided it's exploded exactly 280 miles straight up above the continental U.S. Now, why 280 miles? Because that specific altitude is perfectly designed to trigger a HEMP, a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse. The source implies that a strike like this from a threshold country would instantly fry the nation's electrical grid and pretty much all critical infrastructure. So we're talking no power, no communications, zero logistics. And the ultimate, frankly terrifying data point the source uses to wrap up this thread is a staggering 90% fatality rate within the very first year. Under these specific conditions, the document asserts, the U.S. would simply cease to exist as a functioning country. So, having exhaustively explored every potential path on this decision tree, from a total strategic retreat to that agonizing slow bleed of the status quo, to conventional paralysis, and finally down to the apocalyptic risks of nuclear retaliation, the source concludes its analysis with this single definitive word: checkmate. The author's whole thesis is that the game has reached a state where there are just no viable moves left.
Now, while we definitely remain strictly neutral on these extreme predictions and are just here to report what the source material claims, mapping out this dire scenario does leave us with an incredibly provocative question about the future of international relations. If, as the document argues, literally every possible move leads to systemic collapse, how does the geopolitical board ever get reset? Thanks for exploring this intense explainer with me today. Keep asking questions and keep learning.